over the next 3 years, and in the Academy, we want to tackle a series of topics such as the historical evolution of the idea of Europe. We want to look at the effects of the media, political and charismatic campaigns. And then we want to look at the complexities of federation or engagement in Europe. These are big questions, big topics indeed, but I think we make an important start today.
Brexit demonstrates, at least to me, that there are two competing narratives of the nation, an open European one and a closed one that might be explained in terms of exceptionality.
What makes one period a period of unity and another a period of division? And this came to my mind because the kind of classic starting point for the history of European Union is 1945 or 1940. But actually, for me, that story really starts with 19th century internationalist movements. So it's movements around religious solidarity, around international labour organisations, so socialist solidarity. And that's something certainly we've lost. We think we live in a more interconnected world because of globalization, and that's odd for a historian of international movements, because what we don't have are these popular societies. It's generally forgotten that the League of Nations was in fact the most popular international organization when it was founded. People were out on the streets applauding it and welcoming it, and the hopes for its future. So that's something certainly that we've lost.
The idea of Europe has very little purchase at ground level, at popular level. In a sense, it's a fabrication of the work of elites over the years. It's always an idea of Europe, whether it's illuminist or based around particular kind of ethnic understandings of Europe, or shared values, Christian humanism, or even the secularist ideal, somebody gets left out. And the somebody who's left out is either post-colony, or the migrant, or the job seeker from Eastern Europe. So in some ways or another, the idea of Europe kind of fails, and it fails to have affective grip.
Britain's negative obsession with the EU has always seemed strange to Germans. British animosity towards migrants from EU countries who, as most economists agree, bring benefits to Britain, seems incomprehensible. It seems to many Germans perverse to weaken Europe when the dangers and fears so evident today speak in favour of strengthening our collective ties.
For centuries, Europe has, such as it was, a net exporter of people. People were playing high-stakes games of mobility through refuge, through colonialism, through empire building. People went outwards. It was an outward-looking mobility. Now, perhaps we might want to think about whether or not the world is coming back home to Europe. Maybe that's an interesting twist in the question. What we've exported now is coming back home and knocking at the doors. And it seems that Europe is not very comfortable with that.
Hostility to foreigners now is predominantly economic in essence. It is related to perceived, and I stress perceived, threats to socioeconomic well-being, especially job loss, brought about by the open borders in the context of globalization, for which the EU was an agent. British jobs for British workers sums it up pretty nicely.
It's entirely wrong, I think, to surrender these communities too quickly to an idea of the left behind. I think it sort of imposes an order of dereliction on people. It imposes a sort of expectation of attitudes which aren't entirely justified. So yes, indeed, you see chauvinism, yes, indeed, you see prejudice, but you also see interesting things like people campaigning to keep under 18-year-old kids who they know who are refugees from being carried off into the night by the authorities. So these are interesting places.
We live in societies that are, by historical standards, so peaceful, so prosperous, and so secure. Even if we don't feel that, we would feel it if we went back 100 years or 200 years. Because we have built something really valuable, we are very frightened of doing some of the things that might bring that crashing down, which makes it very hard for us to reform them. And so I think our problem is that the shock that might allow us to reform it threatens to destroy it.
It's almost certainly a disadvantage of the United Kingdom that those other Europeans, by and large, have a good grasp of the English language and have been listening closely to our debates. It remains to be seen how they will interpret those in the light of their own images of the United Kingdom as a partner. And it remains to be seen how the inheritance of half a century or so of UK ambivalence about the European Union will shape stances in the UK negotiations to come.
I'm left with a thought at the end of this day that an imperative for us in the academy, it is time that we began to reconstruct a positive narrative around a nation which has absolute affective appeal. What I'm saying is developing a sort of a language of the future in which the future is made present by taking risks. And one of those risks is the risk of mixity, of saying that we can only ever live in the land of strangers. There is no other alternative, and there is no form of comfort to be drawn from nativism. But I think what I'm trying to gesture here is that it's not beyond the pale to fashion a counter imaginary. The raw material for this sort of thing, both in terms of political economy and in terms of credible imaginaries, is there.